Hey everybody, we got time period 3 for you today, which is 1754 to 1800. So we're going to get started with that. So really this one starts 1754, which is the French and Indian War. So if you remember, that one started over land disputes in the Ohio River Valley between the British and the French. So it's those two fighting with the help of the colonists. The British win, so the French are kicked off of North America. And it's a big turning point between the relationship between the colonists and Britain. Because of the debt that the British incurred during the war, they start taxing the colonists, which they don't like, as you know. Also, this proclamation of 1763, if you remember that, the British draw this line and say colonists can't go west of that line to the Appalachian Mountains, which the reason for that was to keep them from clashing with natives, things like Pontiac's Rebellion that had happened. They're trying to protect the colonists. The colonists just view it as, you're holding us back from settling this land that we just helped you win from the French in the French and Indian War. So that also is a source of tension. So we have these series of taxes: Sugar Act, the Quartering Act, where they have to keep soldiers in their home, Stamp Act, which is probably the most frustrating for the colonists. That one is eventually repealed after some boycott. We also have the Tea Act, which of course causes the Boston Tea Party. In response to that, the British issue the Coercive Acts, or known by the colonists as the Intolerable Acts, which the goal of that is to punish the colonies, especially Boston, for the Boston Tea Party. But we know all of those taxes and those events are going to lead up to the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Paine wrote his pamphlet Common Sense, calling on the colonists to revolt to support independence. In the Declaration of Independence from Thomas Jefferson, we see these Enlightenment ideals like natural rights from John Locke. So he and Ben Franklin were really those Enlightenment thinkers, and we see those ideas in the Declaration of Independence. So the war itself, there's George III. Reasons the colonists support the war: for one, they're not a fan of the king. They believe he's a tyrant. They want more political participation. They don't think Parliament is giving the consent that they feel they should have as British subjects. So that whole no taxation without representation. They hate the Quartering Act. They don't like keeping troops in their homes, and they want to preserve local autonomy. So those are reasons, among others, why the colonists are going to support the war. So really, we don't have you memorize a lot of battles in APUSH, but the one battle you need to know from the American Revolution is Saratoga, because it allows the French to come in on the side of the colonists against the British. And they play a key role in helping the Americans win the war. Remember, the French and the British at this point in history did not get along. So really the French motivation is to weaken the British Empire, which they're able to do. And because of their alliance with the Americans, that allows for more generous peace terms in the Treaty of Paris, one of the many treaties of Paris that we see in U.S. history. After the new nation is formed, the first constitution that we have is called the Articles of Confederation. It is weak, it is wimpy, on purpose, because they just got out from under George III and they don't want to repeat. They're fearful of a strong central government. The main two weaknesses of the Articles: they cannot tax, and they can't exercise authority over the states. So they can ask the states to do what they want them to do, but the states have the final say, and they don't have to answer to any federal government if they don't want to. The Northwest Ordinance, also important from this time period. It creates, in this Northwest Territory that you see here, it allows for the creation of new states. So this is how, after the original 13, we will be able to add more through this process of applying to be a territory and then becoming later a state. It's also important because it's the first time we see slavery being excluded, and they allow for public education in these territories. So that's an important one to know. We have a rebellion. You probably remember Bacon's Rebellion from time period 2. Shays' Rebellion is really similar. It's farmers who are angry about the way things are going. So they're losing their farms to foreclosure, so they want an end to that. They want an end to debt imprisonment. They want more money to be printed. So the causes aren't as important as the effects. So the effect of Shays' Rebellion, it allows everyone to see that the Articles of Confederation are not going to cut it, that they're too weak. It doesn't give the federal government the power they need to keep things like Shays' Rebellion, this mobocracy, that angry mobs are just going to run the country if we don't have some form of strong central government. So that's what it leads to, is calls to revise the Articles of Confederation. So initially they go to revise them. We know when they get there, they just decide to scrap the articles and start over, and they write the Constitution. So in the Constitution, you know this stuff, separation of powers, which is the 3 branches of government. It gives the federal government the power to declare war. Initially, it's going to ensure the legality of slavery. We know that issue is going to come up again soon, but initially in the Constitution, that was preserved, that it was legal. It allowed for the Electoral College and the process of electing the president, ability to impeach the president. Compromises, you see questions on that sometimes about compromises in the Constitution. The Great Compromise is what created the bicameral legislature. Remember the Virginia plan, New Jersey plan, large versus small state, they compromise. That's why we have the House and the Senate, one elected by population and one equal for all states. And then the 3/5 compromise, if you remember, that dealt with slavery, that a slave in the South would count as 3/5 of a person when it came to congressional representation for Southern states. So that, among several of these other things, were compromises laid out in the Constitution. There's disagreement over the ratification of the Constitution, headed up by Hamilton and Jefferson, who we know were arch nemesis. So the Federalists were Hamilton and Madison. They wrote these papers known as the Federalist Papers, the most famous of which is number 10. They want a strong central government, whereas Jefferson and his followers, the anti-federalists, are fearful of a strong central government. They want the power to lie with the states, not with the central government. They're mainly focused in rural areas. They're going to be the ones that push for a Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments to be added, in order to ensure that the rights of the people are being upheld and not overshadowed by the strong central government. So this image you may have seen before. I think we looked at it in class. These are the pillars. These are each of the states. So if you notice, Delaware is first. They were the first to ratify the Constitution. But then you've got these last two, North Carolina and Rhode Island, who we need them to fall into place. It said the 11th pillar of the National Dome. Most fiercely to our dear country, the foundation is good, it may yet be saved. So they're trying to encourage the states to adopt the Constitution, to ratify it. All right, finishing up, Hamilton, we know, Secretary of the Treasury under George Washington. His economic policies, he wanted national debt. He thinks it's going to keep the Union together if we're all under this great national debt. Of course, his big thing was this national bank that he wanted and was able to convince Washington to do. Protective tariffs, state assumption as well, taking on the debts of the states altogether, liquor tax, and then also expanding domestic manufacturing. So all of these are goals of Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. Remember also that he was a loose constructionist, whereas Jefferson was a strict constructionist, meaning that's how they interpret the Constitution. So Hamilton is like, well, it doesn't say I can't, so I guess that means I can. Whereas Jefferson was very strict. If it doesn't say word for word in the Constitution that it's allowed, then you can't do it. And that's why he's going to struggle with things like the Louisiana Purchase, because even though it's a great opportunity, it's not in the Constitution. So that's a big difference in the two of those guys and how they view Constitution. All right, to finish up, George Washington, when he leaves office, gives his famous farewell address, where he warns of two things, neither of which we listen to very well. Don't get involved in foreign entanglements, and don't let political parties divide you. So neither of those are going to be followed throughout U.S. history, as you know. But it does set that precedent as far as not getting involved in foreign entanglements for us to continue to try to return to this isolationist spirit. We see it several times throughout history, especially after World War I. Where we try to return to isolationism, keep with this theme of not getting sucked into Europe's problems. Even though it never really works, those are examples of America following that precedent set by George Washington in his farewell address. So that's it for time period 3. Hopefully you remembered a lot of that from last semester. So feel free to email me or Ms. Brantley with any questions. And I hope everybody has a great day.